There we go.
Boom, there we are. Oh, yeah, I love it how you bet me to it. You might be the host today, Lachlan Hall. But Lachlan Hall, welcome to the Luke Farr Show, a show to motivate, educate, and inspire our next generation of leaders. Thank you, kind sir, for coming on.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity. I apologize for my mix-up of time zones. It's very unbecoming of myself, but I did also get distracted.
Yeah, one might think that you're in Berlin with the time zone, but you're actually only in Australia.
Yeah, only 2 hours difference. A bit awkward.
Out there, yeah, true. Yeah, if you can't get that right, sheesh, I don't know how we're going to move forward. But nonetheless, you're in Ballina, right?
Yeah, in Ballina, so the vibrant community of the Northern Rivers of New South Wales. It's certainly interesting as I sort of get more amongst the community and everything. You've got a lot of characters up this way from all sorts of places.
Yeah. And when you're saying character, like how do you define that? Run us through that.
Oh, mate, character is just someone that you sort of see them and then you're just like, that's a unique individual. Like that's someone that I'll have, like, you'll speak to them and you're like, yeah, you're interesting. Like it's not just like in a city where you see everyone in suits and they all kind of blend into one another and other people. Like you get that a little bit because it is a much more populated area than other rural places in Australia. But yeah, like you'll see people and they'll really stick out as yeah, and everyone just has these like weird little idiosyncrasies and everyone has their own like weird little sayings for things, and you'll just start connecting like quirks and stuff. Like everyone's got a quirk up here. It's really funny.
That's classic, huh? What are some of the characteristics of one of the most unique individuals that you've bumped across?
I'm not sure. I guess most of it just sort of comes back to probably people who sort of grew up in the hippie movement in the area, really, to be honest. Like you've got a lot of people that I've met who sort of are coming from a commune background, and and all the scandals that happen with those, unfortunately. Like they love communes, but then they're like, yeah, but I had a really shit childhood because of it. But it's interesting because there's a lot of people who kind of grew up like way poorer than you'd sort of expect. Like I have friends who, you look at them and you're just like, that's a normal human being, like, just like the rest of Australia. And then you'd go up and speak to them and like, they're like, oh yeah, I've only had internet for like the past 4 years. And it's like, when I grew up, I used to wash in like a bucket. I'd like pour a bucket of water over myself. And I'm like, whoa, like, what is this, the Stone Age? Not to be like derogatory, but I just think it's a bit eye-opening. Like I never really got that. So I went to high school in Sydney, so I never really got that down there.
Yeah, interesting. Do you find, would it be fair to say, because you were mentioning there that sort of they lived out their lives there, would you say they're quite sort of institutionalized in a way?
Up this way,
up that way, yeah.
Not really. Like you've got a lot of mix of people. I think the area is really interesting because I've really fallen in love with Lismore, which is just half an hour inland of here, and that's where like sort of I think the true Northern Rivers spirit is. And it's a town of extremes. Like you will meet some of the nicest people you've ever met there, like the most kind, compassionate, caring, community-focused people, and then you will meet some of the worst people you've ever met there, like people who use the floods as an excuse to jump fences and steal stuff from people's backyards. So like a lot of people are very like pro institutions to a measured degree, but then a heap of people who are like super anti any sort of institution to the extreme. It's not really many institutionalized people that I would say up this way, probably to the detriment of the town, because I mean there is like rural Australia, a big thing is mental health, and there is like rampant mental health and trauma issues in the area. It's pretty crazy,
mate. I guess that's fascinating, mate. Just for the audience, so let's give some context into Lachlan Hall, a little bit about you. I mean, look, I love a natural organic intro and how we just spit fire and we just get into a cafe type chat, but I'm obviously as a guest and host, I guess it is my responsibility to always have the audience in mind, because people watch this, right? But because they'll be thinking the same thing. Who is Lachlan Hall? Yeah. So what are you all about? Give us a quick little bio.
So, I mean, a quick little background of my past 4 years is sort of where I've really sort of become my own person. And I guess the sort of existence of the Lachlan Hall self has really started solidifying. I moved up this way from Sydney after going to high school in Sydney to study film up in Byron. And then I got a visual effects job up this way. And I was doing that for 2.5 years. Just recently there was a company reshuffle, so I got let go. So now I'm retraining to do traffic control, which is what I was just doing earlier today.
No judgment there, but we all know that's not in your wheelhouse. You're a budding inspiring film director, storyteller, aren't you?
Yeah. Well, it's just I've found that I don't have the character to be able to I don't feel like I have the character to be able to climb a sort of corporate ladder and sort of spend years being somebody else's paintbrush, so to speak. So I'd love to, the plan is to, just traffic control in the meantime to make ends meet. Like, it's a means to an end. It's decent pay for the work that it is. And like, there's risks involved, obviously, but if I'm crossing my T's and dotting my I's, I should be fine. And then that'll give me space to sort of work on a film business on the side, whether that's doing commercial work or creating my own passion projects. But in the mix of all that, I've become very politically active the past few years as well. So
nice.
That's been a big focus.
You're taking to the streets of Ballina, big flags,
big
movement, creating these sort of, ad hoc campaigns, bit of 4x2, get the flag up. How good?
I've got my first.
Well, I know you're very versed in the Palestine movement. And I'm looking forward to dissect that and get your views on that. Before we go into that, mate, have you ever got told you look a little bit like Josh Harnett?
No, I can't say I have. I was told that I looked like who was in Streetcar Named Desire?
Somewhere there. There's something there, and I've seen him on the big screen. Have you thought about acting at all? Or?
Well, that's how I got into all of this. Was just drama in primary school. My drama teacher was like, "Oh, you're a really good improviser," and I'm like, "Oh, wow, validation!" And then I just continued.
Didn't do anything with it.
Well, I found more of a love to directing and writing.
Look, you're so young. There's plenty of time. In fact, I'm pretty sure Denzel Washington didn't land his first big gig till 52. You got plenty of time, mate.
Yeah, well, I'm not as well connected as Timothy Chalamet was, so unfortunately, I can't get into acting when I'm 22. But I'd like to join the local theatre group and do some stuff there.
Yeah, and I'm sure you'll do a little bit of a better performance in Delta Goodrum. Absolutely love her, but sure, I think we should get her off the screens as quick as we can. Anyhow, moving right along.
Yeah.
Russell Crowe's done a great job for you, Aussies. Fantastic. So continue with that. So you're doing a little bit of traffic control work. You're really passionate about visual storytelling and would like to sort of create your own indie films. Would that be accurate? Or?
Yeah, I guess. I'm still trying to get into a consistent sort of pattern of actually writing. Like, I've got all these ideas, but then I'm just trying to figure out how to sort of build the confidence to follow through with them, because it's a big ask as someone with no capital to then you just basically, it's all favors. Like, you're asking people to do a favor for you to make a film. And I guess at the end of the day, people want to do that stuff because people enjoy doing it. So it's they'll do it for free, but it's still like what am I giving to the audience to say, hey, you should spend your valuable time to watch, this shitty little low budget project. But I guess maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. I find any creative, I can ask all those questions, but I guess at the end of the day, it's does it matter enough to me to be making those sort of things? I'd really love to make.
What do you love the most about creativity for you personally?
Creativity, I guess I take it I'm a deeply religious individual myself, so I just view it as another sort of expression of worship in a way. But I think as well, the ability to connect as well and bring other people together as well is very magical. Connect them to themes or stories, characters within stories. But then the question is always, how do you make those characters that people connect with?
Well, it's the idiosyncrasies within each character, right?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of them around. A lot of them around this area.
It's all making sense now. You're there for research purposes.
Yeah.
You're doing a bit of R&D and locking things away for when you start writing that script, my friend.
Yeah, I'm just on the street, just interviewing people, writing stuff down in the notebook. He said this, he said that. He's a real interesting guy because of this. No, yeah, that's
classic. That's classic. Hey, I want to switch gears a little bit. I do want to talk about Palestine and just to give some context to the conversation. Situated at a continental crossroad, the region of Palestine was ruled by various emperors. This is just for people. This is just a bit of fun education, right, for people out there. The region of Palestine was ruled by various empires and experienced various demographic changes from antiquity to the modern era. The ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict dates way back to the rise of the Zionist movement and Jewish immigration to the region, which was supported by the UK during World War One. Mate, a quick question to you. Like, if you were to wave a magic wand, hypothetically, and find a solution to bring harmony and inclusion to this situation over there, what would it involve exactly? Big question.
That is a very, very big question, a very loaded question, because I guess I have what a lot of people would consider an extreme view, but I don't consider it super extreme. But I always liken it to South Africa or, Australia, which is why it's very important. Like, it's a lot of young people in my area care about it because they view it as similar to Indigenous Australian rights. But I think the only solution is to remove the arbitrary two states and just have a one-state solution, because I think the existence of arbitrary states will always cause conflict, because you'll always have two states who aren't working together. It's like, imagine in South Africa, if you had a white state and a black state, like, there never would have been peace. And it would have been the same in Australia if we just made the Northern Territory its own separate country and then just shipped all the Indigenous Australians there. Like, it just wouldn't work out. And obviously that's infinitely easier said than done. And even if that were to I waved that wand and that happened today, there would still be a lot of violence and bloodshed, unfortunately, because the reality is people don't just forget things. And you still, like, there will forever be that trauma there from people who have lived through the experiences of the past, 60 years on both sides. So there'll still be people who want some sort of physical sort of, I don't know, I guess, violent justice. And
as a one state idea, is that realistic though?
I think it is realistic.
What are some examples in the world that there's been a one state and the positive effects from it?
Well, I mean, I guess I would argue, like, it's like Australia and South Africa. Like, you could have done split state solutions there. It's the same in even like just any colonial country where there's an Indigenous population, and then the colonial population has lived there long enough that they've sort of become an almost neo-native sort of group. Like,
and look, I'm not just playing devil's advocate.
It's an important question.
This is all just great learnings as well. And also, to be fair, I'm coming from a vulnerable area. I haven't researched probably as deeply as you have, but from my knowledge, like Australia and South Africa, although one state, though, like the apartheid situation in South Africa, and then what the Aussies did to the Indigenous and Aboriginals, would you say that I would argue that hasn't exactly worked, and there's been significant amount of tension for many years with that situation between the white man and the Indigenous.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I'm just some hick from Ballina, so it's like, I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm like as well researched as other people as well. I'm just like a grassroots young community organizer looking to get other people involved. At the end of the day, I do have my own opinions and ideas, though.
Yeah, I love it. We could all share anecdotal opinions.
So I am just going to say, it's like, I studied film. I didn't study history. Take everything I say with a grain of salt, but at least, like, I am coming from a place of good faith. I do just ultimately want to see the bloodshed, and like that is a fair point that you bring up. I think, compared to South Africa, Australia is much better, and there is still like a heap of Indigenous issues, but I think that, with the right policies, they are being slowly fixed. And I mean, you compare what's happening in Gaza and Israel today to what's happening in Australia. I mean, at the end of the day, the Australian, like, one state solution, if you want to call it that, is sort of much better, because we haven't, like, yes, we've got issues of alcoholism, drug addiction, domestic violence, but we haven't got missiles flying at each other, and we're not destabilizing an entire region.
Point. That's a very valid point. Yes.
So, and you can't, like, no matter what you do in the material planet, like, you can't just click your fingers and then everything's all fixed at once. Like, things, even if you have the perfect policy solution and you get that voted in that day, it will still take like years before it's all fully worked out and all the benefits can be seen and are put in place. Especially on issues that are this, like, societal wide at every level of society. Like, this kind of statehood discussion affects every level of society. Like, it doesn't just get fixed overnight, even with the perfect policy making.
Yeah, absolutely, and a very fair point there for sure. Let's switch gears into politics, which I find awfully fascinating, and I guarantee you know a hell of a lot more about this than I do. But for the people out there, I did do some context and just want to get some clear basic fundamentals. So ideological groupings, like generally the left wing is characterized by an emphasis on ideas such as freedom, equality, fraternity, rights, progress, reform, and internationalism, while the right wing is characterized by an emphasis on notions such as authority, hierarchy, order, duty, tradition, reaction, and nationalism. Like, I've heard many identify with terms such as left of center or far right or soft left. Like, I want to get your view on it, Lachlan. Like, is this creating further polarizing views between society? And like, how can we unite as one to create less friction? Because I just don't see it working, and maybe that's the purpose of the world. Are we not all supposed to actually connect and unite?
Yeah, no, I fully agree. I think all these different labels are important for different people to gain an understanding, but also it's like with anything, you need to use them correctly. Like, people then also need to understand that ultimately labels to a degree are arbitrary. And if they're good for like broad groups, for people to get a quick understanding, but then on one-to-one conversations, that's when you can have more deconstruction of the labels and discussions of people on one-to-one. I guess the way that I view politics is, and that's an interesting definition that you brought up, I guess I view it left and right, like it's as a two-dimensional graph. You've got left and right, and then left is more leaning towards a sort of more collectivization and people working together as groups, whereas right leaning is more individualization and people more working as individual units. And then you've got the up, like, I don't know. So I think that's X, and then you've got the Y, which is between authority and like libertarianism at the bottom. So authoritarianism, obviously self-explanatory, more authority, and then libertarianism is less sort of, control over people's personal lives. So you can.
Where's Australia at the moment? Would you say we're on the spectrum?
I think Australia is ever so slightly left of center. Like, it's difficult because it's very, like, America, I'd say, is definitely right of center from my understanding. But because Australia has strong institutions like superannuation, Centrelink, Medicare, we're left of center, not as left as I would like to see it, because I think that we do see a lot of private corporations abusing those systems, like we do with NDIS. You see a lot of private corporations overcharging the system, which is effectively just exploiting the people's goodwill to help out those who are less fortunate. Me personally, I identify myself as a liberationist Christian or a liberationist theologian, which was
what does that mean exactly?
Yeah, so it was a movement that was big in South America in the 70s among the Catholic Church there. And you had like actual Catholic communes created all throughout South America. And a lot of the more further left parties in South America, actually have their roots in this movement. So they're like, it's interesting. A lot of people view Marxism and left-leaning ideology not as anti-religious. But then this entire continent, like 90% of its left-leaning parties grew from a religious movement. And it's essentially a Christian adaptation of the Marxist notion of dialectical materialism. Now, that's a big word.
There's there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
Can you reframe that in layman's terms without the terminology that a PhD student needs to interpret?
Yeah, well, I can't say that I fully understand it myself. The long and the short of it is it's basically viewing history and society as people grouped into wealth classes. And the core sort of, I don't know, log line or tagline to it is all history is all society is just a form of class warfare between all these different classes. And the Christian viewpoint, or the liberationist theologian viewpoint, is basically expanding on the idea of sin. So in the modern age, sin has become viewed as very much an internal, personal, individual issue. Like, if I were to sin, it's a fault of my own being, and it's purely just a moral failing of me as an individual. Now, that is true for a lot of cases, but liberationists take it one step further and make the argument that you do have systems in place in society that can systemically create sin. So, for example, if you were to remove welfare, then you would have a whole lot of people who are going hungry for a variety of reasons, and then they're forced to sin, i.e. steal from another man, for example, steal from another person, because they haven't got anything better to do.
Would you say religion's brought about more positivity or negativity in this world that we live in today?
I genuinely believe that religion has brought about more positivity. If you look at literally every NGO around the world, like at least 90% of them, I'd say, would have been created by a religious group, whether that's Islam.
Do you identify as Catholic or?
No, so I myself am not Catholic. I'm currently attending a Uniting Church here in Ballina, a really great church. We have an incredible minister.
Right.
So I identify as for the most part, just a Protestant, a general Protestant.
Fantastic. Well, that's very fascinating, isn't it, for people out there to not know what is a general Protestant? How would you quite simply define a general Protestant?
I guess it's just more, I follow the teachings of like the Uniting Church, and I'm not like strictly following the rituals of the Orthodox Church or the Catholic Church, but I don't necessarily specifically adhere to any of the practices of any specific Protestant church. But yeah, I guess I'd just say I'm like a Uniting Christian specifically, but I don't necessarily like identify as anything more specific than Protestant, because I don't think that there's any real need to.
Yeah, fair enough. Absolutely. Yeah, whatever works for the individual. Like, so have you always been religious growing up, or is it something that you sort of found in your sort of earlier 20s, or?
Well, it's when I was really 16, I guess, is when I'd say that I had the like. So I grew up in a sort of pseudo-Christian household. Like, my parents weren't super religious, but they identified as Christian. My grandparents, on the other hand, were much more like church every Saturday, or not every Saturday, sorry, church every Sunday. So like I grew up in a Christian environment, but I'd never really sort of self-identified myself as a Christian until I was 16, when I volunteered on a Christian holiday program for an Indigenous community near Cairns. And like there was a few nights where we stayed back at the church and sort of interacted more with the local community up there. And I, did a little testimony about things that I was struggling with at the time, mostly just, family issues regarding to how to deal with this and how to forgive a family member for things that I disapproved of. And afterwards, I had one of the elders of the community come up and say that she like really resonated with my own testimony, and that she like sort of felt the Holy Spirit speaking through me. And I think that's when I like felt something inside of me that I can't really describe, and I kind of just view that as like I viewed that, I guess, as what people would say as the Holy Spirit. And that's when I kind of like my faith became less of something that was taught and then something that was more compared to something that was more real to me.
That yeah, 100%. I really value that a lot. I mean, it's a unique feeling for everyone. Yeah. So that feeling of the Holy Spirit that came through you, like, how would you describe that exactly?
I guess like it just felt like there was like something. I don't know. I guess like I describe it as indescribable, really, because it's something that's beyond the material plane. It's like when someone's like, "What can you describe God?" It's like you can't really. Like the whole concept of it is beyond our understanding because it's
Mm.
beyond the material. Like we just have no form of reference. It's like asking someone to say, "What do you think life was like before you were born?" It's like, I don't know, dude. I can't imagine what it's like to not exist because I've only ever existed. Um,
It's a good point. That's a
which,
very good point.
yeah, which is why I feel like in the context of like the promotion of like the scientific method is defining what is and isn't true, like that's purely a material system, and it works for proving material things, but it just arbitrarily says the immaterial cannot exist.
Do you believe in reincarnation?
As a Christian, I do believe in a form of reincarnation in the sense that we are reincarnated into our heavenly bodies.
Mm.
I wouldn't say that I apply believe in like the Buddhist or the Hindu sense of reincarnation where we come back in the cycle of samsara, I think they call it, back to this earth, whether that be as another human or an animal. Christians would believe, and I myself believe in reincarnation, but not in how it's been popularized recently with Eastern sort of traditions.
Nice, fantastic. Hey, I want to read you this piece because I've just researched it recently, and it does heavily relate to Australians, predominantly the Indigenous. And
Sorry, just a sec. I just got to close my door.
Oh, that's okay.
Ugh.
Is there a bit of wind there in Ballina?
Sorry about that.
Is there a bit of wind there in Ballina?
No, it was just my housemate.
Oh, very good. Mind you, I do want to say, phenomenal for you joining the show there, Lachlan. I mean, generally we do get, thought leaders of the elitist, but and you, my friend, are literally my audience, because my whole purpose of the show is inspiring the next generation. But I like to flip it on the canvas sometimes, and I love getting the youth talking about their views and opinions. And so I just want to thank you for coming on the show.
No, thanks again for the opportunity.
Yeah, no worries. Happy to have you here. So just a piece I researched earlier related to the Indigenous people there in Australia. So I'll just read it out. It'd be great to get your thoughts around it because I found it quite fascinating. So DNA from Indigenous Australians has revealed evidence of ancient interbreeding with an unknown branch of humanity around their ancestors encountered 72,000 years ago. And the study, to be published in Nature, which is a publisher, supports the out of Africa theory, where early humans moved out in almost a single mass exodus at least 72,000 years ago, with the most prominent shift to a prehistoric supercontinent known as Sahul. That then land linked mainland Australia with Tasmania and also Papua New Guinea to the north, before rising seas made them separate islands. But the mystery new species identified through saliva DNA sampling of 83 Aboriginals and 25 Papua New Guineans to create the new genetic code still remains unknown. We don't know who these people were, but they were a distant relative of the Denisovans. I haven't researched Denisovans, but I'll look into it. And Papua New Guinea and the Australian ancestors probably encountered them close to Sahul, according to Professor Willersley. So all of that is absolutely fascinating, because originally I thought that there was some form of correlation with them coming from simply Africa alone back in the day.
Yeah, interesting.
But a lot to unpack there. I found that look, it's always good to do good research. But yeah, how are you finding in the current state right now, 2024, with the integration with the Aboriginals? That they are slowly being more ingrained into the community, aren't they?
Yeah, I think it's been a two-way street so far. Like you've had a lot of Indigenous people being more integrated into Western society, and you've had a lot of Western society sort of putting in accommodations for Indigenous peoples. most of those accommodations I think are wonderful, and they really like create a unique culture in Australia, such as the welcome to country, and ceremonial things like that, smoking ceremonies and whatnot. I can't say that I know the nuances of it specifically. From my understanding, most and like Indigenous like culture is being promoted and celebrated where it can and should be, at like local community events. And you've got like, just in Lismore, I was at an Indigenous bookstore that had like all these different Indigenous artworks and everything up, which is great. But yeah, then you still have issues of the intergenerational trauma, which creates, alcoholism, drug abuse, domestic violence, but also just the issues of like a lot of these people, because of their loss of culture, they're living in places they really shouldn't be anymore. Like Indigenous culture, like from my understanding, and I'm not going to claim to be an expert.
No, that's fine. Look, I had a good friend of mine now, and a very, very intelligent guest, Nathan Kinch, on the show, and he would preface that all the time before a sentence. And look, I always say to the guest, this is a very comfortable show. No one judges here, and we are all entitled to our own opinion. And look, we're all not experts. I mean, look, we only just need to look at the number one podcast in the world. I mean, love him or hate him, but Joe Rogan gets the gurus on that are experts, but he might have a sentence and he goes, I'm just a dumb idiot, but I can have an opinion on it. But yeah, we could, because if you did, look, I think it would close down the conversation if we simply consistently referenced or said every time, oh, I can't have an opinion or say on this matter if I'm not an expert. And
yeah.
You can speak freely, man, like have an opinion. Look, and even if you haven't done your research, and that's fine as well.
Yeah. So it's like off the back of that, it's like my understanding, it's like a lot of communities, their issues is their lifestyle. They've have this Western lifestyle forced onto them, but doesn't work in their geographical location. Mostly communities in remote and like rural environments. Like, why would a civilization or a societal setup that was based around having like a harsh snow winter for 3 months of the year work in the outback? Like it just doesn't make sense. It's not set up for that. And then these Indigenous folk have had that forced onto them, whether through just them being institutionalized and then thrown back out there, or having their communications networks break down, because most of it is like an oral tradition. So if you take children away from their families, like the tradition kind of falls apart, and then you put the families back or the children back where they came from, and it's like, well, why are we here? Besides the fact that we were born here, like we don't understand how the community actually worked here, and now you're telling us to take this community from the other side of the planet and force it to work here. Like it just doesn't make sense, which I think then like continues this cause of a lot of domestic violence, alcoholism, drug abuse, mental health issues that you see in remote and rural locations. And the thing is, these issues aren't even like they're big in the Indigenous community, because the Indigenous community has like all the issues of the stolen generation, land dispossession, but as well as they're like, from my understanding, the Indigenous community is way more represented in rural locations than they are in metropolitan locations. But even like white people in rural and remote locations also struggle with a lot of these, or not white people, I should say, non-Indigenous people also struggle with these issues in remote and rural locations. Like the concept of youth suicide is rampant amongst all youths in rural and remote locations. So a lot of it is geographic. Last year with The Voice, I think there was a lot of different voices which came up during the Voice referendum, and I think there's a lot of it really showed, though, however, there is still a fundamental lack of understanding from a lot of Australians in regards to the sort of like what a lot of these things mean. Like you get a lot of people who don't quite understand what a welcome to country means, and they act very harshly towards those things. Like a welcome to country isn't saying that you're not welcome in Australia. It's just a native welcoming you to that little part of Australia. And it's like, it's not a big deal that that's happening. Like that should be embraced. It's just like a form of greeting that's unique to Indigenous Australia. And it's like, if you claim to be a patriot of Australia, like, what's more uniquely Australian than Indigenous Australian customs? You know, like, are you an Australian or a British patriot? You know, and they claim to be like pro-Australia, and then they see this uniquely Australian thing that is purely like, you wouldn't get that anywhere else. You wouldn't get an Indigenous Australian welcome to country in Canada or New Zealand, because there's no Indigenous Australian countries to be welcome to there. So you've got this super uniquely Australian thing, and people who claim to be patriotic Australians are just attacking it, as well as like all this misunderstanding on, they get too much already, and not quite an understanding of how like welfare systems work, and the concept of, because The Voice ultimately was just another form of a better form, I would say, of government engaging with community. So there was like a fundamental misunderstanding of how governments should work and how they should engage with communities, which was very, very sort of disappointing to see. But I think it was very sobering, at least I hope that it was very sobering for a lot of people to realize that there is still like a lot of work to be done, sort of educating the population on how these things work. And I think for me, I think the big thing is educating them to be, you know, have a stronger understanding of the Australian civil society. Like, what is a referendum? What is an actual like local council election compared to like a federal election? Like, how do these things differ? Why compulsory voting is important? Why you're forced to vote on these things?
Could you see yourself in politics?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be a career politician, but I feel like I don't have the privilege to not be at times, because it just feels like people are so disengaged with politics. Like, my goal politically is not to go into politics. My goal is to get more young people involved in politics. Because I think a lot of people as well, and this goes to my discussion on civil education, a lot of people think politics in Australia is just what happens down there in Canberra, but it's not. It's like, politics happens, you know, at your local bowls club where you have branch meetings. It happens just down the road.
Yeah, I agree. Could you be the younger version of Bernie Sanders?
The younger version of Bernie Sanders, perhaps. I'd love to be younger version of Ben
You're certainly
Chifley.
not the younger version of Donald Trump. Let's be clear here.
Yeah, no, I'm not rich enough to be. Unfortunately, my dad has not given me a small loan of $1 million. Fingers crossed he will anytime soon. Maybe I will be.
You'd probably do better with it than what Donald did initially.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say I researched on what he did with it.
He lost a fair bit, mate. Yeah, no, he had a lot of inheritance, many failures before he finally found something that provided an ROI. Anyway,
well, I mean, that's the joke about this whole self-made story that a lot of people go on about. It's like the same thing with Elon Musk, and they're like, they made all these mistakes, but you got to keep getting back up. And it's like, yeah, they made mistakes, and then they got another loan from their parents, and it's like, it's not really self-made; it's intergenerational wealth. Like, and then there's an element to be made.
Is that a fact? Look, I haven't read. Look, I know Elon's background as far as the, you know, from PayPal, etc. But did he come from a wealthy family? Did he?
Yeah, his family were emerald miners in South Africa, which then brings into the whole discussion on did they get those mines in a moral manner?
Right. No, of course not. Yeah, no, getting the searching for the cobalt.
Yeah. So yeah, there's like, yes, in this system there is a lot of self-made stories, but those at the top are rarely ever self-made. There's a lot of privileges that they get, and you know, it's not necessarily bad to be privileged, but to not discuss and understand where these privileges come from, that's when it gets dangerous, in my view.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'd firmly have a lot more respect to someone that, the proper rags to riches story, rather than the rags to riches story that's just a sort of fictional tale to, you know, drive viewership, or, you know,
well, it's a fictional tale told by a lot of people that drive
anyway. But if someone legitimately has come from nothing and turned it into a lot, huge respect, absolutely.
Oh yeah,
because that is so challenging to do, especially in this world that we're living in, right? Like,
there's like so many barriers to entry these days. Like, it's the whole system is just set up to you know, keep the rich and make sure the poor see the picture, really, to quote a Midnight Oil song.
Yeah, great, but not awesome, man. I was just going to say, that's fantastic. Hey, Lachlan Hall, that is all sadly we've got time for today, but I'll tell you what, we'd love to have you back on the show. I think we need to allocate at least 2 hours, mate. There's a lot to unpack there, but for that little teaser for the audience, I've absolutely enjoyed this conversation, and thank you so much for coming on the Luke Farr Show, a show to motivate, educate, inspire our next generation of leaders, proudly sponsored by Topology Skincare. But, mate, seriously, in all sincerity, thank you. I've thoroughly enjoyed that conversation and learned a lot from you.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me and giving me this opportunity. I think what you're doing here is really important, and, you know, to be a part of, hopefully, you know, getting other people like me to be inspired and get involved and show that that's a real possibility. Like, that's just a real blessing. So thank you for having me on, Luke.
That's awesome. Thanks, Lachlan. Thanks very much. I'll just hit stop record or do a little debrief.